and welcome to the Experience Maker Show. This is Dan Gingiss, the Experience Maker, customer experience speaker, coach, author, and podcaster. So glad to have you here today and every Thursday at noon with us on the Experience Maker Live show. Hey, we got some news today. Two things about the new book. First of all, the audiobook is out today. I have gotten so many requests for audiobooks. It's funny, I am not particularly an audiobook person myself, but man, there's a lot of you out there that are. So please go ahead. If you've been waiting for the audiobook version, it is available now. Also, the other great news is that both my book and my guest's book have been featured on Forbes today as two of seven marketing books to help propel your B2B business forward. So very honored about that. Check out that article. And speaking of which, I am so excited to bring to you today a gentleman who has been in the B2B marketing space for a bit and has developed a certain amount of expertise. And as we know, marketing and customer experience are coming together and coming together and coming together. In fact, I predict in 5 years that either there will no longer be such a thing as a chief marketing officer or a chief experience officer, because it's going to be the same role. I don't know what we're going to call it, but it's going to be the same person. So without further ado, we've got the CEO of Renegade and the author of Renegade Marketing, Drew Neisser. How are you, sir?
I am great. Two comments. One, totally pumped up by the music. Like you should just play that like every, say, 5 minutes during the show. Part two, very cool about the Forbes thing. And then three, the audiobook thing. You read yours yourself, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah, that's hard, isn't it?
You know, it is. It's the first time that I have ever read an audiobook before, and it was a different kind of challenge. I mean, you and I are both used to speaking on stages and presenting, but this is very different. You're in front of a microphone. I was in a studio by myself, just reading my book and, you know, trying to think about, well, where do I need to have more emphasis and where do I need to show some enthusiasm, or do I need to just be steady because I'm reading versus presenting? It was an interesting challenge.
Now, let me ask you one question. Did you find any typos as a result of reading the book?
I did, and it frustrated me so much because I not only had a professional editor, I had my friends and family. I read it 1,000 times. And so, yes, I wrote them up as I was reading and already talked to the publisher about getting them fixed in the next version.
How many did you find, just out of curiosity?
It wasn't a ton,
Right.
but there were 5 or 6. There were a couple of like quotation marks that they should have been open marks and they were closed marks and that sort of thing, which very few people notice except for me. But true typos, probably 2 or 3.
Yeah, this is my advice to anybody who writes a book, because my audio engineer said he's never had an author read a book without finding a typo. So before you go to press, record the audio version and make sure there's still a chance, because you will find 5, 6, 7, no matter how professional your proofers are. And it's just so, and I was lucky, but there was also one sentence, maybe 2 sentences in the book as I was reading it going, that just doesn't make any sense.
That's what I meant to say.
Yeah, no, this is something got in the translation of all the editing of, the pages that got missed. So anyway, we just got a bonus tip for all the folks that are thinking about writing a book. Record the audio version, even if you don't want to use your own voice, because it's really hard, by the way. I mean, you know that, I know that. It's hard. And I have no idea how my audio book came out. I just have one friend who just downloaded it, and I can't wait for her review.
Me too. Because I haven't listened to the audiobook yet. Yeah. And it's funny because I also, as you know, co-host a podcast every week called Experience This. And Joey and I split up our roles, and one of my big roles is I listen to the episode before it launches to make sure that the editor did a good job and there's nothing in there that shouldn't be. And so I have always heard it by the time it goes live.
Right.
And that is not true of the audiobook. So I probably owe myself, which is going to be painful because I don't like listening to myself.
No, none of us do. We don't. I can't listen to my own podcast. It just can't. I'm sorry.
It's tough. It's tough. Well, hey, you have a brand new book out. It is called Renegade Marketing, or do I hold this here? Renegade Marketing, 12 Steps to Building Unbeatable B2B Brands. Tell me about it, Drew.
So it's a book that was meant to solve a problem we identified 4 years ago. And it was identify that B2B marketing had gotten ridiculously complicated. And I was curious if there was a way to solve this problem. So our team got together and we wrote an outline of things that you could do to simplify the process. And then I went and took it and turned it into a roadshow and started talking to CMOs about that. Now, meanwhile, I interview a CMO every week. So I'm always talking to chief marketing officers. Then we did some research and we found that sure enough, 90% of B2B CMOs agree that B2B marketing has gotten ridiculously complicated in the last 12 to 24 months, and it hasn't gotten more effective. So there's this problem. So we wanted to dig deeper. Anyway, long story is, before there was the book, there were the 12 steps. And after the 12 steps, there was a blog post, the mother of all blog posts. You can find it on renegade.com. It's 15,000 words. And that sort of gave us a lot of confidence that this content was good. There were some holes in that report. And so that's what I filled in over the last year and a half. And really it's to say, if we have this courageous strategy, if we are artful in our ideation, if we're thoughtful in our execution, and we have the scientific method and we follow these steps, it's really hard to fail. It's really hard to fail. But if you skip any of them, there's a good chance that you are not going to build an unbeatable brand.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And I see, I had this happen too. It's always fun to see when you're a #1 new release in some category and you happen to be in industrial marketing, which I'm sure is one you were aiming for.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm dominant. There are 3 books in the category and we're the hottest out. No, it's nice to be #1 in anything.
In anything. I agree.
And by the way, I suspect they don't have a B2B category. So industrial is as close as they get. That was my thinking.
Yes, fair enough. Well, definitely people go check out this book because, B2B, I certainly find both in marketing but in particular in customer experience, is B2B companies are so stuck on the fact that they think they're different from B2C and that the rules don't apply or that they're different rules. And, I've told this story a number of times, but for a while when I would get off stage at a keynote, almost all the time, till I finally started addressing it on stage, a B2B person would come up to me and say, "Hey, great speech, loved the examples. Does customer experience apply to B2B?" And I perfected my answer because I have a very straight face. I would say, "Well, that depends. Do you market to human beings?" And then I wait, right? And it's like, well, of course. I mean, you're not marketing to an edifice. You're not marketing to an ivory tower. You're marketing to a person who is also a consumer. And so, and I think this is true. And I said before that marketing and customer experience are really coming together. When we think about how to market to people, oftentimes B2B use these techniques that they themselves don't like when other people do to them, right? They're annoying marketing and sales strategies. And I've written about this as well. I mentioned it a little bit in my book because I had the experience of being the recipient of these sales pitches when I worked in corporate America. And so I've tried to help salespeople understand, hey, look, this works, but that joke that you think is really funny, I've gotten 17 times in the last month. It isn't funny.
Yeah, I mean, everything, I'm nodding my head with everything that you're saying, and we are definitely on the same page. There's some few things that I think have led B2B CMOs astray because they would respond to you, well, I really don't have one person in my buying committee, there are 14, and each one of those has a different persona and different needs. And so this is a really interesting part of this. This is one of the reasons why B2B got so complex, but not more effective. So what they think is, oh, well, I've got a CFO and a CISO, and I've got a CEO and a finance committee. I need almost to present the brand differently to each of those individuals. And that's where the complexity happens, because suddenly you have 9 or 14 different personas and different messaging. And fortunately for me, before we wrote the book, Gartner and Brent Adamson had already done research that showed that if you send different messages to the buying committee, when they get together, they're 2.2 times less likely to buy your brand because they have a different story in their heads. Oh, I like it for this. I like it for that. Well, it can't be all of those things. So somebody's wrong. So this notion that you need to have, you definitely have to address their needs, but your story and your brand essence and how you come across and the promise that you're making and the experience that you're promising, as you talk about, have to be the stage. And what happens, I think, in B2B and why this complexity is they're jumping to tactics before they sort of identify on this really core distinctive message or story. And, that's why chapter 2 is Dare to Be Distinct. It's because a lot of CMOs, here's another research factoid that you'll love. 60% of B2B CMOs, when surveyed, will say our brand is distinct. But when you say, no, I'm sorry, their product or service is distinct. When you say, is your marketing distinct? Only 40% of them say, wait, what? Yeah. Our goal with marketers, as marketers, is to differentiate, if not distinguish, our brand. And so that to me was shocking, and again spoke to this ready, fire, aim approach that seems to dominate a lot of B2B.
Yeah, for sure. And I have watched this because I work with a lot of B2Bs who are my clients, and I have watched them, even asked them to give me the sales pitch. And I like the nightmares come back from when I was in corporate America, because what happens is they tell me 50 things that their platform does. And I'm like, look, I don't need you to solve 50 problems. Okay. That's just way too complicated. And where my mind goes is IT's never going to buy into this. Legal's never going to buy into this. I don't even know what the budget's got to be. It's way too complicated. And so what I've always advised them is, can you just focus on the one thing your product does really, really well? Sell me on that. And then the bonus is that it does all these other things as well that I may or may not get into down the road. But I find that even salespeople have a difficult time, and therefore marketers, explaining what their own product does without added complexity.
I know. And this is, again, why, I'm excited about people reading the book. They're going to see, well, how do you do this? They're going to hear about David Friend, who is the founder of Wasabi, but before that, he founded 6 companies that have all had major exits, including Carbonite. And he doesn't invest or start a business until he knows he can tell the story in 8 words or less. So Carbonite was easy backup. Okay. Right. It's a $1 billion plus company now. And Wasabi, there's a whole story in the book about how they came up with the name. It's very old school. And it's a fun story. But Wasabi, the business proposition is 80% cheaper than AWS and 6 times faster. Boom.
There you go.
That's pretty strong promise. And by the way, with a name like Wasabi, hot cloud storage immediately adds some personality to the brand. And they're off and running. And, now this guy happens to have the audacity to take on an AWS and a Microsoft and IBM and these giant companies and Google in the cloud. And they're doing amazingly well because they kept the story simple.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned this, because the other thing that B2Bs tend to do is pick these names that may have a story and may be meaningful to the founders, but that mean nothing or are even potentially confusing to the general public. And I'll tell you, one of my pet peeves, as we were talking about copy editing before, is when any company takes a name and then intentionally misspells it, throws a Z at the end instead of an S or whatever. It drives me nuts. But there are so many companies out there that have these names that are just not English words. And so, or they're English words that mean something else, like Wasabi. And so that, to me, puts even more pressure on marketing to explain what the heck it is you do as quickly as possible. Otherwise, I've just moved on. And I watch, when I go to trade shows and stuff, I'll walk the trade show floor and I'll just look at all these booths, and it's name after name after name of company that are just made up words. And so then, yeah, you're going to have to do some explaining. And I think keeping it simple, look, what I love when I talk with you is that so much of your perspective on marketing is also customer experience, and keeping it simple is one of the best customer experience suggestions that I can make. In fact, we know from another study that the number one contributor to loyalty is reducing customer effort. In other words, keeping it simple, right?
Yep.
If customers can't figure out even what you do, how in the world can they be loyal to you? Hey, we have some questions and comments coming in.
Awesome.
Jesse, be good. Tell your story in 8 words or less. Love it. And he has a question for you, man. Drew, this is going to be tough. This is like picking from, which is your favorite children. Of your 12 ideas that you offer, which 1 or 2 do you feel like are the most impactful? What's your most beautiful child? Who is it?
Oh my God. So where you fail is strategically. That's where you fail. It's execution. You have no chance of succeeding without having strategy. So any one of the first three, let's see, clear away the clutter, dare to be distinct. I would say dare to be distinct is probably the most important part of this, because I've already in clear away the clutter, we just said, focus, focus, focus. It's your friend. And it's your friend, not only as a professional trying to manage your life, it is your friend as a business partner. Dare to be distinct just reminds you that if you got to make choices, and if you're not daring, if you're not courageous about the choices you make, you're going to be all things to all people. You're not going to excel. So daring to be distinct means, really jumping on something. So I think in that chapter, I tell the story of a construction company that came in to bid on our hallway renovation in our co-op. This is, what could be more boring than hallways and in co-ops? But this guy comes in, and we'd already heard a bunch of other companies that talked about all the things they did, restaurants and so forth. They came in and said, we only do hallways for co-ops and condos. That's it. And oh, by the way, here are the 10 emails that you're going to want to send to your co-op owners, because the biggest issue that people complain about are these things. And oh, by the way, we put 10% of our budget into cleanup because we know that's what people complain about. They transformed the way we thought about the problem from, oh, we need a new hallway, to complaint mitigation. They really changed the way we thought. And their focus enables this guy now can win 70% of his bids. He's more cost effective than anybody else in the marketplace because that's all he does. But when I asked him, how was it when you made that decision? He said it was really hard because we had to turn business away. And I just heard another example of this, by the way. SADA Systems. SADA Systems used to support 3 different cloud platforms. Now they only support Google. Guess what? Their business grew when they stopped trying to do all 3 of those things. So that daring to be distinct really forces you to make choices. And that's what, that if you do that, you say, we only serve this target and we have a very simple promise and we go to market with that. I think you have a chance. I think you're still going to need some of the other steps, but that will really give you a strong foundation.
The dare to be distinct reminds me actually of a story in my book around and this was a B2B as well. So a design agency was working with, thank you, Drew, was working with a B2B company and was trying to convince them to change their navigation labels. And the company was resisting, the reason being that everyone else used the same navigation labels. And which of course is a terrible reason to keep doing something. But that aside, the agency decided to go out and survey people. And they did a very in-depth, statistically significant survey where they talked to, 1,500 people. And what they did was set up a scenario in which ABC company had these exact same navigation labels. And they said to the potential customer, where would you go to find X? And what was incredible was that I think there were 4 different label choices, and the results were about 25% each. In other words, customers had no idea where to go find this because the labels, and I'm talking about, products versus services versus resources versus, they're just these generic words that people can't distinguish. And so only when this study came back saying the labels that you're using, people don't understand, did this company were they finally willing to take the leap and say, maybe we can have different navigation labels that actually make sense to people. And you go look at the best e-commerce sites, and that's exactly what they do, right? You go on to chewy.com. It doesn't say products and services and resources. It says cats and dogs and birds. And, it helps you filter very quickly to what it is that you're looking for. And I do think a lot of times that not only do B2Bs want to be everything to everyone, they want to be Salesforce or Google or Amazon, which is a great ambition, but I would argue that Salesforce isn't everything to everyone, even though I think they try to be, but they also want to be like everybody else, which is exactly the wrong way to be distinctive. I like to tell people, if you work for a bank, the last place to look for inspiration is another bank. You should be looking everywhere else other than that.
Yeah.
Speaking of inspiration, I want to point out something that you probably didn't know I was going to do. I'm going to show this. This is Drew's business card. And I want to stick my finger through there very gently because his logo is a saw, but he has actually cut out this saw or the outline of the saw into his card. The saw is like, I mean, it's got some edges on it. That thing might actually cut something. Anyway, my point is you created an experience out of your business card, which I love because a business card, has become somewhat of a relic. I still hand them out as well. I hand out more than I get because most people don't have them anymore. But tell me how you thought about doing this and why you decided to create an experience maybe in a place people didn't expect an experience.
So a couple of things. First of all, in the book, I also talk about pounce on your purpose. And I talk about trying to find a purpose-driven story statement that defines your brand. Our purpose at Renegade is little p purpose, as in to help our clients cut through, right? That's what we do. That's our purpose, cut through. And it's a little p purpose. We're not saving the world. We're just helping our clients cut through. So, everything that we've done over a long period of time with saws has been about sort of reinforcing this notion of cut through. Well, guess what? There's nothing like a physical embodiment of that to bring it to life. So I love sharing those cards. I'm so glad you noticed. But I will say also, we all borrow from the things. When I got your book first, I noticed your business card in the book and I went, brilliant, because that allows you to point the person to the page on the book that you sign. So thank you for giving me a use for the business card.
No worries. Well, and what I love about it is you are practicing what you preach. It is distinctive. It is daring to be different. Everybody has a plain business card except for Drew. You've got something that's going to stand out. And I am a believer that all of us in this business of podcasting and being thought leaders, quote unquote, and writing books and all that we got to practice what we preach. And so I love that you're doing that. Another question coming in, not perfectly relevant to what we're talking about, but I'm going to actually shift it to make it a little more relevant. Kevin Baker wants to know, how often do you guys experience bad service at a restaurant and relay the matters to a manager? I think this is really interesting. And what I want to say to you is I'm going to answer that question, Drew, but you're the B2B guy. Mm-hmm. I want to know, how often do we see bad experiences with B2Bs that actually get reported and maybe brought to management? I feel like most customers just suffer in silence.
Interesting. So in the book, there's a whole chapter in my book called Sell Through Service. And this is where customer experience and marketing just really combine. And in that chapter, I talk about before you can sell through service, you have to have a certain level of service that is the standard. Whatever the standard is in the industry, you better do that. Now we can move on. And I tell this story of LegalZoom. So I think when we started CMO Huddles, I was looking to use them. I don't know, remember if it was a DBA or a trademark, but anyway, it's a pretty basic process. And because it was during the pandemic, I did it through them, but I wasn't getting any service. And I called the call center and there was no picking up because nobody was in the call center because they weren't coming to work. So I did what I resort to. I threw a Twitter bomb. And I included the CEO of LegalZoom in my tweet. Within a half an hour, the CEO said, not our policy, not our plan. This is not the way we believe in customer experience and service. Within another half an hour, I got a call from the executive team. They solved the problem. Boom. Next thing you know, I'm back in everything is going. So Twitter bombs are being thrown out all the time. It doesn't hurt that I have a large following on Twitter, so therefore they're going to more likely to pay attention to my Twitter bomb than maybe someone else's. So I think the point is, as consumers, if you're not getting the help you need, you're going to go somewhere else. And this was a case where, as a B2B customer, we weren't getting the help, but they resolved it and they did a great job of it. And now it's featured here on this podcast. It's featured on in my book. And so, every crisis is an opportunity. And so I think you do a business a favor when you complain. I know Jay Barrow would agree with that. You do them a favor. So I don't know about restaurants, but I know a lot of times people do it after the fact and they do it on Yelp and so forth. And that's really hard because now you're really going to cost them business. And so I love the use of social, particularly Twitter, for customer experience complaints. And so any B2B businesses pay attention to that, or should.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue you definitely should try to get the problem solved while you're at the restaurant. I mean, that's the opportunity that the restaurant has to fix it. And
Right.
I agree with you that, complaints are a gift, and we got to look at them that way, because the people who complain because they care. They want an answer. They want resolution. If you didn't care, you would have just fired LegalZoom and gone somewhere else. And
Right.
there are other places that you can go, but you actually wanted resolution. And so it shouldn't require you to have to go drop a Twitter bomb. I mean, that's sort of the obvious statement, is I would have preferred that you got that service on another quieter channel when you were trying, but you weren't. And so I think, with the restaurant, why suffer through a bad meal or terrible service just to be disgruntled later? You might as well bring it up to them and see if they're going to take the opportunity to fix it. If they're not, you're not coming back.
Right. And by the way, you don't have to be a jerk about it. In the tweet that I did, I put it in a very positive light. Say, I've had very good experience for you. I'm assuming this is a COVID related issue, but I'm figured you'd rather know about it than not. Yeah. Let me know what you think. I didn't say I didn't give them a 2-star review. I was politely informing them of an issue. I think you could do the same thing in a restaurant and find yourself next thing you know with a free dessert and another drink and the chef walking by and say, gee, I'm sorry.
Yes, being a jerk rarely gets you what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if you kill people with kindness, you're generally going to get what you want. And I always advise that to people when they say, how do we get better service from companies? Well, start by being kind and being nice, even if you're frustrated, because oftentimes the people on the other end, it is not their fault. Drew, as usual, the half an hour on this show just absolutely flies by. So I'm going to put me on the screen here for a second so that I can give a close-up of Renegade Marketing, 12 Steps to Building Unbeatable B2B Brands by Drew Neisser. You got to check out this book. It is chock full of amazing ideas for B2B companies. And I think leaving people with the idea of daring to be distinct is such a great takeaway, because that alone gets them thinking differently. And that's what we got to do to stand out. Is if we think like everybody else, what we know is we're going to end up average. We've got to think differently. Drew, how do people connect with you besides from Twitter?
Renegade.com, Drew Neisser on LinkedIn. If your listeners want a PDF copy of my book to write a review, just hit me up on LinkedIn and I'll send you one. I'd love to do that. Or if you want a cheat sheet on the 12 steps, you got that too. So connect with me on LinkedIn.
Outstanding. And Drew is also a prolific content creator. So he's a great follower, not just books, but he writes a lot, does his own podcast. So lots of great content if you follow Drew. Thank you, sir, for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the support that you gave me in launching my book. And it was really fun to launch. We were 2 weeks apart from each other, so we were kind of going through the same thing at the same time. And congratulations on the success of your book and future success as well.
Thank you, Dan, so much. And thank you to the audience for hanging out with us.
Well, thank you as well to the audience for being here. I really appreciate it. And thank you for being here every week on the Experience Maker Show. Next week, we are going to bring you another fantastic guest. Her name is Lynn Smith. She is a former anchor for CNN Headline News and has also been on a number of other news stations and networks that you will recognize. And now she is teaching other people how to get onto television with whatever it is that they're doing. And she's awesome. I have worked with her. She's so much fun. Really excited to bring her on the show next week. Once again, check out Renegade Marketing and The Experience Maker, both available on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold. We'll see you next week. Have a great rest of the week. Terrific weekend. Thanks for joining us.